there is still an unwillingness to take this on. I mean, you have a situation where Rangers Football Club admitted acting unlawfully over many years to gain sporting advantage on the pitch. They admitted this in court. They said we did the EBT scheme because it allowed us to buy players we could otherwise not afford, right? Sporting advantage. That was found to be unlawful at the highest court in the UK, the Supreme Court. Okay? And nobody kind of seems to make the obvious conclusion to that is, why the hell have they still got all the trophies that they won under those circumstances? That's an outrage.
I think
it became a non-issue. I mean, I found that, and I still find that baffling.
Yes, I think the answer to that, Alex, is that Rangers, the reincarnation of Rangers since 2012, has had to suffer terribly because of that. The idea that the original club has been liquidated was very embarrassing for them, and anathema to fans. The idea that the historic timeline was broken, it was a new club, that's anathema to Rangers fans. The club has been 10 years in the wilderness. They've not won they hadn't won a domestic trophy for 9 years, whatever it was. There are constant barbs and taunts about the old Rangers, the new Rangers. I kind of think my view of this, of what you're saying, is you're right. There should be some definitive statement about these old trophies that were won under very dubious circumstances. But the club...
Graham, they weren't won under dubious circumstances. They were won unlawfully.
Right. They were won...
The unanimous verdict of the Supreme Court, who, moreover, in their judgment said, why the hell has this been allowed to come so far to us?
But is that not a damning enough indictment? And is liquidation of the original club not damning enough indictment? Do these two furious things? Okay.
I'll tell you why, because you're conflating two issues. The liquidation and so forth, that related, and the dropping down of all the leagues to play the likes of Annan with their hedge. That of course is all the Craig White, cheating,
Yeah.
Which is much in time frame, much shorter. I'm talking about the EBT things, which went on for the best part of a decade. And there's no way those trophies and championship, only won under those circumstances, could be allowed to stand, under any rationale. I'm just talking I'm just talking merely about the law of the land, but
Yes, no, I totally take on board what listen, Alex. In one way, you're preaching to the converted. I take on board what the finding of the Supreme Court. I just think the SFA, in a way, probably don't make a definitive statement about these dubiously won or illegally won trophies, because the club was liquidated. Rangers fans have learned to say, looking in the mirror with a straight face, they've learned to say, we were nearly liquidated 10 years ago. They can't bear the thought of the blunt truth of what happened. I just think the collective misery and guilt has been foisted upon Rangers. And there's a part of me that kind of says, look, that's enough. But I take on board everything you say about what went on. Listen, let me ask you one thing. Alex, I remember one story amid this whole hoo-ha. I remember one story you did on air that was about the threats and intimidation coming from a small minority of Rangers fans towards various people, journalists, QCs, club directors, the writer Angela Haggerty and others, which I must say, it all rang true with me. I mean, it absolutely chimed with the abuse and the threats I'd received over the years writing columns about Rangers. Do you remember that particular item? And I think it provoked further venom that came your way because of it.
Yeah, it did. Undoubtedly did. But I mean, what amazed me about that story was it's the sense in which this stuff is somehow tolerated, somehow considered part of any kind of normal society, And you had all that stuff about the intimidation that was going on, the abuse, and in fact it resulted in a prosecution for the guys who behaved in such an appalling fashion to Angela Haggerty. But at the same time, we got a parallel universe in Celtic, who to this day, sitting there claiming that the Celtic Boys Club, which was lodged in the premises of Parkhead, was somehow nothing to do with Celtic, separate entity, and somehow institutional years of paedophile rings, that besmirch the reputation of that club to this day, as somehow they're trying to wash their hands of it. I mean, these are so far from the norms of any kind of societal norms in the 21st century, and yet it just seems to kind of roll on and on and on. It's extraordinary. I just find it mind blowing. I mean, say like about English football, and as someone who has just left the club I've supported for 55 years, in disgust at the Saudi takeover, when English football was faced with the paedophile thing, the clubs stood up and took it on the chin and said, "Yeah, we got a problem," and did something about it.
Yeah, this Celtic story is going to be the next. I was going to say the next huge cloud that's hanging over Scottish football. It's not coming. It's already here. Yeah, Alex, you mentioned Angela Haggerty and the abuse she took. I mean, she received this utterly vile abuse from that poor nutter who I think got banged up for a few months. My recollection is, I might be wrong, that did you reach out to help her, or was it a report you did that played a significant role in that chain of events?
I think it was the report that we did. We played. I think we got some of the material.
You did.
Used it was a phone in, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
saying get on here, get into and all this sort of stuff. It was a clear incitement, and it was incitement on the basis of her being a Catholic, or Catholic heritage. So the police did a very interesting thing. I mean, they used it as a sort of case. I think they did it under sort of racial harassment, or I think that was the sort of dimensions of it.
Yes.
About that now, but it was quite an interesting sort of a groundbreaking case. And two detectives came down to London, one of whom seemed very vigorous and interested in pursuing this. The other looked like he couldn't give a toss. But they nevertheless came down to ITN, interviewed me. We gave them material, and it did result in a successful prosecution, which I think probably, I would like to think, served as a shot across the bows for people who think just because they're online they can say what they want and all that, So, but of course it wasn't just her. It was it was the general harassment of journalists, and as you say, of a QC and so forth. And
I watched the story. I watched the piece last night just as part of my prep for this, and it's true. Angela came in for horrendous abuse from and actually from people who, this is what happens on social media. You have people who have they have this Jekyll and Hyde life. So they're an accountant or a teacher or a financial analyst by day, and at night they're nutters on social media posting bile. This is a recurring theme. Twitter betrays humanity and all its flaws, And this was a classic case.
But they are publishing, so they are subject to quite rightly to the laws of the land. And sometimes that escapes them in their moments of late night bile.
Yes. Alex, what do you remember about quotes succulent lamb? Now I remember
asking what the hell it was.
I remember
you told me, Graham.
Well, you came to me. You came to interview me on the subject because I had sort of unwittingly invented the phrase, or at least I'd invented the definition, meaning grovelling, sycophantic football writing, because I was taking the piss out of Jim Traynor in print, who was a notably suki towards David Murray, and the whole succulent lamb
off
thing.
The scale wealth.
Right, yeah. Well, the whole succulent lamb thing took off, and you came to me with a camera crew. You might not remember this, but we went to One Devonshire Gardens, and you grilled me on the subject of succulent lamb journalism.
I was never going to make it onto television, but I was just fascinated. I mean, the whole there's a wonderful Glaswegian richness and dynamism and texture and wit to all this, which is just, to my mind, irresistible. It really is energy, Glasgow's his people, and my God, when you come to football, you really do see that. I mean, for better or worse, but it's a great energy, great creativity.
This is a difficult question to ask you, but I'll ask it anyway because it's quite important. I was wondering what all of this told you, Alex, about, if anything, about the culture of Scotland. I mean, there's a feeling up here among some of us that some of these problems around Rangers stem from a significant cultural shift in Scotland over the past 50 years, a move away from a dominant traditional Protestant influence to both a more varied Catholic influence in education and politics and a more multicultural influence here, which is to be welcomed, but which caused, quotes, the hardcore to be angry and resentful and bitter and fighting back. And I'm sorry to say, maybe a few of those, quotes, hardcore attach themselves to Rangers. This, I think, was a factor in it all. Was this all new to you?
No. I mean, I wouldn't like to dig too deep. I mean, I have a slightly different influence in my formative years as a journalist. We lived in Belfast, where, you know, it's people live behind walls. You know, there are peace lines, and you kind of literally know where you stand. You know, and one of the things I always found amazing about Glasgow, which I can still to this day, having had a background in Belfast, still can't get a handle on. I mean, there is this currents of sectarianism, of course there are, but everybody lives cheek by jowl, you know, and that's particularly on our old firm days. I mean, I can't begin to work out the genius of the policing operation as to how all that works when you're in a city where people don't live in defined sectarian ghettos, which, for better or worse, they still, to a large extent, actually do in Belfast. It's not actually talked about that much, but it is true. You know, with the exception of the south, the city is pretty much carved up. So, you know, that to me was, I could never quite get a handle on that, but I found it, I mean, it was wonderfully intriguing, you know, because there were these currents of sectarianism. Of course, it's not Belfast, but the short answer to your question is the cultural trajectory of Protestantism in northern Britain is one of loss.
Yes.
You know, they have moved from the cultural supremacy and the god-awful gerrymandered failed state in Northern Ireland, in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. That's a phrase that'll rile them.
Yes.
To and abroad, to some degree, the same thing has happened in a much diluted form, you know, across you know, the hills and towns and villages of Ayrshire into Glasgow. Of course it has. And that is right and proper.
Yes.
You know, but so you can see quite clearly that if you are, you know, steeped in that culture and you feel hard done by, you are looking at a culture of loss. There's no question about that. You are.
Yeah, I think that's like you, Alex. I don't want to over-egg this or oversimplify this, but but as someone myself who's steeped in the Protestant tradition, indeed steeped in the Protestant church tradition, actually.
Yeah, me too. My ancestors are Scottish Presbyterians.
Okay, well, we're even more staunch than that. We're Scottish Baptists.
Oh, right.
But I have seen what you call this Protestant cultural loss with my own eyes. I've seen it diluted over the years, and I'm pretty sure, without overstating it, without oversimplifying it, I'm pretty sure that's linked to the anger and resentment and bitterness that you sometimes find about the wider narrative of Rangers FC, simply because of the association between Rangers and that historic Scottish Protestant tradition. Listen, but
we are the people.
We are the people, yes. It's perfectly summed up in the phrase, we are the people, which the power of which has been painfully for them diluted over the years.